I just want to read this concept of, for me, what breaking bread is. I mean, everybody kind of has heard that line for years upon years. And it's sharing food. It has been a way for all cultures to create and sustain a bond with family and friends, talk about the day's events, their job, their school with their sons and daughters, a sense of verbal face-to-face communication. And in a sense that has been missed and been replaced with texting, Skyping, you know, the non-verbal, anything to not be confrontational, I think has been missed. And everybody here, I know, I have much admiration and respect for, all the way from the Million Man March, all the way from 89, 99. Shortly after, you know, and I got a lot of respect for you guys as men, as what you guys do in the community, and just walking the walk. And so my thought is, let's break bread, let's talk, let's have dialogue, let's say what's on our mind.
Martin Luther King taught something called creative tension. I happen to believe in that.
And define what that is.
It's forcing the contradictions. You know, in his case, between the Christian-centered man, is a challenge the Christian community about their beliefs. And he practiced in raw form the Sermon on the Mount. Like, love your enemy. That ain't easy, you know. And it's very unnatural. He understood that. At least as unnatural as aggressive violence. Nonviolence. Malcolm X had the correct position, self-defense, which is a declaration against violence. But King taught that these violent, brutal races to face them. That's the contradiction. In fact, contradictions are the principal law of nature, when you think about it. King did that before our very eyes, and there were some advances. The Civil Rights Movement challenged Jim Crow / segregation, which I call white supremacy. All racism is white supremacy that we face. You challenge those institutions. You got some bills passed, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 65, and 68, which is the first since Reconstruction, when you had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments passed. George Wallace could say, I draw the line in the dust before the feet of tyranny. Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. This is the governor of a state defending the doctrine of white supremacy. I say white supremacy because that's the part that makes people nervous and full of angst and anger and so forth. That was a brutal thing. Physically, psychologically, spiritually, across the board. It was a system of caste. That's what black people live under. Caste, you know, it's hereditary. You can't get out of this. You know, you inherit the condition of your parents. That's what blacks live under. Slavery was more graphic, but segregation was simply a modification of the caste system. African American, to their everlasting credit and courage and bravery, beat that system, not the government. The government responded to a movement. Governments don't initiate movements. The people created this, forced the government to respond, to be responsible to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment.
Yeah, and I read somewhere just today that 67% of all the hate crimes are still against African Americans.
Yeah.
You know, so you're basically saying 2 out of 3 hate crimes is because of the color of our skin. And, you know, you hear and you have, you know, a large group of us who think we're, you know, better than we were then. And to some degrees, you know, they're absolutely right, you know. But in retrospect, I think that adversity that we as Black people had to go through, there was a sense of togetherness that we don't have now.
Well, I would even say that when I look at the killings going on in Chicago, I would call those self-hate crimes. You know, and that is some of the legacy of slavery, segregation, second-class citizenship that we see. But it's hard because there's no one to point at but ourselves. It makes me scared when they talk about the young man in Chicago who they say, if he would have been charged a year prior with illegal gun possession, this young lady never would have been shot. At the same time, if we lock up every young Black male who's walking around in Chicago with a gun, unfortunately,
that'll be a lot of them. And that's what the one thing that irritated me about the whole Sandy, Hook situation. And don't get me wrong, by no means am I trying to dismiss what happened, because that's a travesty, period. Any life being taken is a travesty. But to dismiss, like you said, the Chicago killings, and I think, what was it, like within 2 days, there was like 33 killings at one particular point last summer, you know, and then now all of a sudden we need gun control. No, we've been needing gun control, you know. I mean, what are you saying? I mean, you got gang members that's been walking around with assault rifles and automatic rifles.
To me,
why
it says
now?
that, without really saying it, it says that the value of Black life really isn't that much.
that's what it is right there.
And, you know, to kind of piggyback what's said, you know, in terms of the different forms of racism and the different levels, you know, it's real complex, you know. Some of the stuff you're talking about kind of falls under what we would call internalized depression. You have internalized depression, you have structural racism, and you have institutional racism. You have the different institutions, whether it be, you know, FHA, redlining neighborhoods, you know, banks and schools, and then you have how those institutions have engaged whole generations and communities. And then also to be able to frame racism as post-traumatic stress, you know, because, you know, it's definitely stressful, you know, you know, living in these conditions, you know, and for me, coming up, you know, I grew up in the early 70s, you know, to where you still would see, you know, some of the overt racism, you know, but these days, you know, even in terms of the creation of the ghettos and things of that nature, or the cutting of after-school programs during the Reagan era, you know, that to me is my entry point, you know, in terms of the creation of gangs and different socioeconomic disinvestments, you know, to me that is where racism is now. So to say that there's this is a post-racial society is a farce. You know, you're talking about, for example, I was looking at a study that said at one point in time you can get all of the Black millionaires together, but still all of the Black millionaires still don't, or all of the Black bankers still don't even equate to the lowest register of white bankers in general. So you could have Black capitalists, but in relation to how wealth is distributed in general, that right there, you're dealing with isolated incidents. You know, so you can have situations, but it's not equity for everyone. You know, and I feel like these forms that we're talking about are a lot more difficult to uncover. The way I look at it is, you know, this is what we deal with every day. And I'm happy that there's a lot of confusion, people are uncomfortable, because I feel, kind of going back to what you said about controversy, you know, tension, causing heat. You know, you can't go around it, you gotta go through it, right? You know, and to me, I feel like on one level, racism to me is a social construct, but until we can get through that, we still have to address the realities and the pain and the issues, I mean, that are here as a result of that construct. You know, so you can't just get to kumbaya place and holding hands without necessarily going through some of the issues.
When I look at the constructs of what we actually rally around and what we're fighting about, and then I think of the base causes of these things and what we're actually addressing, Like, trust me, I have the deepest sympathy for everybody involved in everything from the shootings in Chicago to, you know, Sandy Hook shootings and, you know, all the way down to Columbine. However, what I have a problem with is when we go on a tirade and we say we're gonna have gun legislation, right? What does that actually solve? I mean, the reality of the matter is the things that have gotten us to the point where we're ready to do something wasn't an act that was committed by a quote unquote criminal felon with a gun. These were legally acquired weapons. And when they went into their tirade, they used those legal arms and pumped legal rounds into citizens and killed them. But then when it's time to go do something, they focus on criminals. And for me, I have a problem with that because when people think criminal, my face pops up a lot. You know what I mean? And so I have a problem when they propose this as a solution and this is a rally call. You know, so like for me, I'm trying to get down to the root causes. We know and understand that racism functions off of certain disparities. It has to have educational, economic, and social disparities in order for it to exist. Until we have the conversations about breaking down the feeders of racism, I don't really care about all the mumbo jumbo. I'm not getting excited. I'm not going out to protest. I'm not calling nobody to vote down any for or against any legislation. Why? Because we're not serious. This day and time, when I look at these young brothers and sisters, I don't feel like I'm doing my job if I sit and meander around the real point. Because they're not going to be that dumb. They're going to see it right away. And then they're going to look at us and be like, okay, so y'all watched millions of people go into the streets over Trayvon Martin. Y'all still didn't talk about race in the presidential election? Mm-hmm. What happened? See what I'm saying? Me personally, is about evolution. What are the innovations that we need to make right now, and who's making those? The thing I like about people like Mahmoud, we don't have very many wells of history left in our community that are accessible, that we can just go and talk to. I knew what was up when who was it? Cornell was like, this was one of his mentors, and I was like, hold on, time out. And we see him every day. So we need to take advantage of people like him in order to make sure that we're properly informed on what has already been fought, what has already been tried. We've tried a lot of this stuff. We know first and foremost that we passed legislation about a lot of different things. But we also know that you could pass legislation, but the culture takes a lot longer to change. That's right. So the impact that we're gonna have, even once we pass legislation, is still not gonna be felt immediately because people are gonna feel the way they feel. I also look at what we squander right now. I think in terms of, if we're gonna look back at what the fighters before us, Fannie Lou, you know, Malcolm and Martin did, they also evaluated the playing field. The boycott on the buses was more so not just about we want respect when we come on your bus. They knew what got white people's attention. They pocketbook. Economics. And it hit them right where they knew they would pay attention. Wasn't gonna be no Christmas bonuses this year because the Negroes weren't riding the bus. We need to get back to things that have that type of impact.
So you can't eat it, you can't pick it up, and you can't touch it, and you can't taste it. But it's here, baby.